Well, good morning. My parents were born in the city of Baghdad, which is in the country of Iraq, which, by the way, is not a great place to take a vacation these days. In case you're thinking about taking a trip this summer, hold off, at least for the next, 2,000 years. But my parents, when they raised my brother and I, we grew up mostly in the States. When they raised us, they didn't raise us to be Muslims. They actually raised us to be Christians. And the reason is because my people, my ethnic background is Assyrian. Now, this is not to be confused with Syrian, which is a reference to Syria and the people that live in the Middle East today. That's a country that exists today, different people group. My people are from Assyria, which is a country that has not existed for 2,700 years. So just out of curiosity, raise your hand if you've ever heard of the Assyrians at some point in your life. Yeah, okay, so a lot of you have. Chances are, if you've read any parts of the Old Testament, you'll recall the Assyrians, my people, are talked about in the Old Testament, which sounds kind of cool until you realize we were the sworn enemies of Israel. So consequently, that made us the sworn enemies of God. So that was kind of a bummer growing up and finding that out, but with therapy and counseling, I should probably get some counseling from you. I got over the emotional turmoil of knowing, we were the enemies of God. But enough about my problems. Let's talk about why what we're here to talk about and discuss. And I want to begin this day by asking this question: who says who we are? Who should we listen to tell us this answer? Should we listen to mankind, and culture, or should we listen to our Maker? And, probably many of you know about the company GoPro. They're a large company that makes perhaps the most popular action cam out there. This is the Hero 10 Black, which is one of the editions, although I think now they're on either Hero 11 or 12. I don't know what version they're on. And these action cameras you can stick anywhere, on your skis, on your scuba gear, on the wheel of a truck. And every time I watch these videos where they advertise these action cams, I always think to myself, man, my life is incredibly boring, because they always have such cool videos. But whenever I see these videos, I always have to ask a number of questions about the GoPro. I always think to myself, well, how far underwater could you take one of these things with scuba gear, right, before the housing just kind of cracks under the pressure of the water? Or what's the lowest temperature it can be exposed to? I mean, could you take it to Antarctica? Could you, go scuba diving underwater in Antarctica? Or what's the best way to mount it, on the wheel well of a truck so it doesn't fall off while a truck is jumping? I mean, you'd probably want to know something like that if you had a GoPro. Or what's the best way to maximize its battery life so it lasts as long as you want it to last? And so I'm sure we probably have all kinds of questions about the GoPro and what are its tolerances and so on and so forth. So the question then becomes, well, okay, so who's the best person or who's the best group of people to answer these questions about the GoPro, right? Would it be this group of people, right? Would they be the best people to talk to and maybe tell you a definitive answer? Well, obviously not, right? They're a bunch of kids. I mean, maybe they've used one before, but clearly they wouldn't be authoritative, all right? What about your Hawks? I don't know how well they're doing this season, but my guess is they can play basketball well, sort of well, right? Are they above 5.5? No, they're not. They're below. Okay, yeah. Okay, so I probably shouldn't bring them up. Let's move on. What about a news team, right? I mean, they use cameras all the time. Would these people be the authoritative people to answer questions about the GoPro? Probably not. What about Nacho Libre? Yes. I mean, even if he didn't have the answer, I'd still want to know what his answer would be, right? But I think you realize that none of these groups of people would be the best people to talk to and get definitive answers about the GoPro, right? If you wanted a definitive answer about those questions, you'd have to turn to the engineers at GoPro. The ones who are the designers of the GoPro. They're the ones who decided what materials are going to be used. They're the ones who crafted the housing and designed the housing, right? They're the makers of the GoPro. And they're the ones who would be in the best position to explain how the GoPro's made, how to maximize its battery life, what kind of tolerances it can handle, all of those kinds of things. Right? And that's obvious. They would be the best ones to know. And that's why every time you purchase a GoPro, it comes with an owner's manual. And that owner's manual has been informed by the makers at GoPro, by the engineers. Well, thankfully, the engineers didn't write it directly, because engineers are oftentimes bad at writing things to lay people. But most likely, the engineers at GoPro helped inform the writing of that manual so that the user can know, oh, okay, I know how this thing is supposed to function. Well, this kind of is connected to the idea of, well, what about us as humans, right? We have all kinds of questions about ourselves, right? Who are we? How are we supposed to function? What should our relationships look like? If we engage in sexual activity, what are the boundaries of that activity, right? How should we deal when there's problems in relationships? How do you reconcile? All these kinds of questions about, who we are and how we're supposed to be. And again, the question will be, well, all right, who is the most authoritative person or group of people to answer those questions, right? Would it be Hollywood? Would it be Taylor Swift, right? Would it be the latest biologists or scientists? And of course, they're all going to give the answers. I'm not saying they don't have answers, but I think we probably realize that in the same way that we would turn to the makers of the GoPro to understand the GoPro, is probably the reason why we'd have to turn to our maker, our designer, the one who made us, to explain how we're best supposed to function. And that's why it turns out that we also come with an owner's manual, right? Of sorts, right? We have the Bible, which is our maker's sort of explanation about how to answer those questions. Hey, what should relationships look like? What should sexual activity look like? How do you resolve conflict? All of these kinds of things. And so we don't have to look to celebrities or, social media influencers or TikTok and Instagram or whatever it might be. We can just turn to our maker. And so what I want to do this morning to kind of introduce this topic is ask 4 questions about our identity and see how both man and maker answer those questions, right? So kind of a compare and contrast these two answers. And I think what you'll see is that a lot of the answers that are given by man oftentimes are just questions based on personal opinion or maybe the latest science, which of course latest just means that, new science will come along later on and maybe overwrite previous science answers. And also I think what you'll notice is that a lot of the answers that are given by mankind are oftentimes kind of just, and I don't mean to be mean here, just depressing answers, okay? So let's take a look at these questions. And first I want to turn to the question, well, were you created? Were you created? And so let's turn and see, well, what does man say about this question? How do they answer it? Well, I think I want to turn to one of my favorite people here, Bill Nye the Science Guy, okay? So this guy purports himself to be a person who helps to explain science to, everyday folk. And I think he does a good job at that in general. And so listen to what Bill Nye says about the answer, or about the question, were you created? He says this, he says, no, you and I are made of stardust. We are the stuff of exploded stars. Now, I just want you to realize here, he's not making a joke. He actually is very serious about this. He actually believes our body is composed of ultimately stardust. And most people in the field of cosmology and this kind of work would agree with him. Take, for example, Lawrence Krauss. Lawrence Krauss is a famous cosmologist, famous theoretical physicist. His PhD is from MIT University. I mean, this guy's no intellectual slouch, right? And listen to what he says from his book, A Universe from Nothing, about whether we were created and how we were created. He says this, every atom in your body came from a star that exploded. And the atoms in your left hand probably came from a different star than those in your right hand. And it really is the most poetic thing I know about physics. You are all stardust. And he continues, you couldn't be here if the stars hadn't exploded, because the elements like the carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, iron, all the things that matter for evolution and for life, were not created at the beginning of time. Rather, they were created in the nuclear furnaces of stars. And the only way for them to get into your body is if those stars were kind enough to explode. So forget Jesus. The stars died so that you could be here today. He puts that quite nicely, right? I mean, obviously, he's sort of poking fun at this idea that Jesus is our creator, right? But the bottom line he's trying to make here is, look, we are the accidental products of exploded stars. We are stardust, right? We're here by chance. No one thought to make us. Nobody had us in mind and said, okay, I want to now create humanity. No, we're just stars exploded, right? And think about this. If you take a mountain and put dynamite into it and blow that mountain up and the pieces of the mountain just kind of fall down, do those pieces matter? They don't matter. They're just chunks of rock and plant and dirt. They don't matter, right? And so in the same way that they don't matter, we wouldn't matter if that's all we are is just exploded stars, right? Stardust. And in fact, not only would we not matter, but we would be a tiny don't matter. We would just be a speck. In fact, listen to Bill Nye explain this very point about how not only do we not matter, but we're just a tiny don't matter. And this is Bill Nye speaking at a American Humanist conference in San Jose a while back. Take a look.
So I remember thinking, I am just another speck of sand. And the Earth, really, in the cosmic scheme of things, is another speck. And the sun, an unremarkable star, nothing special about the sun. The sun is another speck. And the galaxy is a speck. I'm a speck, on a speck, orbiting a speck, among other specks, among still other specks, in the middle of specklessness. I am insignificant. I suck.
So it's very interesting. He almost wanted to say, I'm nothing, right? But he basically ended up saying the same thing. He said, I suck, right? I'm meaningless because, again, he's just a speck. We're all just specks in this world of just a bunch of other specks, right? We're stardust. No value, no purpose, no meaning. And again, this is kind of why I say, a lot of the answers that we hear from man and culture, mankind, are kind of depressing answers. When you think about it, there really is no ultimate meaning to any of this. And of course, I would say any atheist or anybody who's in the same field as he is, of course, that doesn't adhere to Christian convictions, would completely agree with his assessment, by the way. So I'm not trying to take some, minority view. This would be kind of the official view, if you will. So how does our Maker answer this question about were you created? Well, again, we could turn to our owner's manual and see what the owner's manual tells us about who we are and where we came from. And it's partly true. Yeah, actually, the Bible does make a comment about how we are from the dust of the ground, but we're more than that, right? Genesis 1:1 says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So God made the universe, right? It didn't just kind of come from nothing like Lawrence Krauss believes. It came from someone. And then it goes on in Genesis 2 to talk about how the Lord God then not only formed the universe, but he formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. So not only did God make the universe, but of course he made us as well. And when you think about the fact, the realization, which is incredible, that the same God who has the power to make the universe, the stars, the planets, and black holes and all these things, also took the time to make each and every one of us, it seems like the appropriate response would be to worship and give praise to this being who has that kind of power and yet has that kind of care for each of us. And that's why it makes sense to see things like Psalm 139, where the psalmist writes, I praise you because I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful, and I know that full well. So we see here that God purposely made us. We're not an accident. And we're wonderfully made because our Maker loves us, right? And we're not just one of God's creations, like he made, mountains, and he made black holes, and he made people, and he made planets. Like, yeah, it's true, he made all those things. But humanity is the pinnacle of God's creation. And although there are, now probably 8 billion people on earth today, we're not just another number, like another person in God's minds, right? We know that God knows each and every one of us. And that blows my mind to think about that, but that's why Jeremiah talks about this. He says, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you're born, I set you apart. So this God knows each and every one of these 8 billion people and all the billions of people who've existed from, throughout all of human history as well. It's remarkable. So that's the answer to the first question, were you created? We can now turn to the second question, well, what are you? And again, we could turn to man and say, well, what does mankind say? What does the latest science or culture say about this particular question? And as you probably know, the answer is, well, according to modern scientific thinking, we are all the product of evolution. Okay? Humans are just evolutionary byproducts. And you might ask, well, what does that mean? Well, it means a couple of things, right? Because evolution is a blind process, which means there's no sort of foresight or forethought about what we want to create. Oh, we want to create humans, and so we're going to direct things to make humans. No, that's not what happens with evolution. It's kind of a blind and chance process, and whatever ends up being made, right? So you can see this process led to, snails and starfish and, turtles and plants and seaweed. It also led to humans and zebras and birds, and, right? They're all just a bunch of different things that were created. And so when you consider that we are just another production of evolution, it turns out that we humans are not higher or lower or better or worse than any other created or any other product of evolution. Because the same blind chance process that led to the emergence of mosquitoes and rats also led to the emergence of humans. And so there's no reason to think that we are any more special than any one of those things. And when you think about that and you consider there are people who believe this sincerely and who live consistently according to it, they would agree. We are not more valuable than any of those other byproducts. Consider Ingrid Newkirk. She's the founder and president of PETA. PETA is the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. They're the largest sort of animal rights organization in the world. And of course, she acknowledges that we are, absolutely byproducts of human evolution, as do many people around the world as well. And listen to what she says. There is no rational basis for saying that a human being has special rights. A rat is a pig, is a dog, is a boy. They are all animals. Right? So she's saying there's no greater, humans are greater than animals or, anything like that. We are all the same. We're all products of the same blind, chance, and random process. And so when a human dies, technically speaking, there's no rational basis for thinking that it's any more significant than if a cockroach dies. Because cockroaches and humans are the product of the same sort of force. Many of you probably remember back in 2016, there was a famous gorilla named Harambe, Cincinnati Zoo. And unfortunately, a 3-year-old boy fell into the enclosure of this gorilla. And you could see him kind of sitting there. And I'll have a quick video clip to show some of the very frightening moments that transpire during the next 10 minutes.
I don't know how to go. Hey. Come here. Okay.
Mommy's right here.
Please come. Oh my God.
Isaiah.
Everybody back up. I think he's trying to switch.
Okay. Mommy loves you. I'm right here.
No, he's playing with it. He's playing. He's playing that. No. He doesn't. He's protected.
Please protect him. Isaiah, be calm. Be calm.
Good.
Be calm. Be calm.
Oh my God.
And this went on for 10 minutes until finally the administrators of the zoo got out a rifle and shot Harambe and killed him. Now, of course, the boy was saved. He had some minor injuries, but nothing serious in any significant way. But of course, Harambe was a rare silverback gorilla. There aren't many of them. However, there are millions of 3-year-old boys, right? And so naturally, people who understand and have a worldview of naturalism, of human evolution, like this is the way we got here, realize this was the wrong decision to shoot and kill Harambe. And there's many people who weighed in on this. For example, Bron Taylor said this: an individual member of an endangered species is more valuable than an individual human being. And again, think about it. We're all just products of evolution. So gorillas and humans, well, they're not necessarily one's greater than the other. But when you consider the fact that silverback gorillas are an endangered, almost extinct species, wow, there's a lot more little kids out there. So why are we going to shoot the gorilla? Now again, why would people claim that? Again, it's because if you believe that there is no maker and that we're just a product of human evolution, then that makes actually perfect sense. There's nothing irrational about that when you consider those premises, right? But of course, I mean, I'm not making the argument here, but of course we know that that's not the case. There is a maker. I mean, and even I'm not trying to argue that evolution is what God used, but even if God used evolution, at least there is God who has made us to be valuable in his image. And of course, this is how our maker answers the same question. What are you? Well, according to our maker, according to our owner's manual, God made us in his image according to his likeness. And of course, there's a lot of questions about, well, what does it mean to be made in God's image? And I'm not going to go into all the details of that, but obviously it doesn't mean that God has arms and legs, and it doesn't mean that we are divine, okay? So let's just get that out of the way, right? But it does mean that there are some qualities and characteristics that are kind of passed on from God to us. Things like, well, we have a personality. God has a personality. We have emotions. We have a mind. We are able to reason. We're logical like God. Well, maybe not everybody's logical, but a lot of us are trying to be logical, right, about things, right? And I think this recognition that we are not just a product of evolution, but we're made by God and made in his image has significant consequences for how we understand who we are and our significance. In fact, I think there are at least 3 important realizations when you consider the fact that we are made in God's image. Number 1 is this: we are valuable, right? The answer that man gives us is that if we're a product of evolution, we aren't valuable. We're just stardust. We're just the product of an exploding star, and we were made by chance through evolution. The maker says, no, that's not the case. I made you, that's why you're valuable, because I grant you value. Second of all, I think the consequence is this: we are more valuable than than animals. So humans are more valuable than animals. It isn't yes, God made animals and he made humans, but because humans are made in God's image and animals are not, therefore we have more significant value than animals. And the third consequence of being made in God's image, I think, is that we are all equally valuable to each other. Now, this is significant, especially in light of our current culture, which is really wrestling with things like racism and who's more valuable than who else and who's trying to argue that we're that way. Like, there's obviously a lot of talk about racism and the importance of making sure we treat people equally. But here's my question. How does our culture justify equality? How would our culture, which is primarily steeped in naturalistic, non-Christian worldview thinking, how do they justify the fact that all human beings are equally valuable? I don't think they can, actually. Because think about it. What is the one characteristic every human being shares equally. Can we all run the same speed? No. Do we all have the same intellectual faculties? No. Are we all as good at math as each other? No. What about playing the piano? No. Are we all the same height? No. Same age? No. Are we the same strength? No. What characteristic does every human being share equally? The answer is, on the account of the world, of man's answer, that we're just byproducts of evolution, there is nothing. There is no physical characteristic that every human being shares equally. Now, the only thing that we do share equally from the perspective of our Maker is that we are all made in the image of God. And notice, being made in the image of God is not a degreed property. It's not like you can have more of the image of God or less of the image of God, right? You're either made in the image of God or you're not. And so notice, this concept of being made in the image of God is the one thing that every human being shares equally, and this is what justifies the idea that all human beings are of equal value. In fact, it's no surprise that the Declaration of Independence, one of our founding documents in the United States, says that all human beings are equal and made by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. I mean, Martin Luther King Jr., right, when he argued for his case for the civil rights of African Americans, how did he justify that? It wasn't because he was a naturalist who rejected God. No, he was a Baptist pastor. He believed in the image of God, and that's how he was able to justify his case for the civil rights of African Americans. Because he knows all human beings are made equally in the image of God. And so that's why no matter whether you're young or old or small or large or slow or fast or good at math or not good at math, or whether you identify as gay or trans or non-binary, or however, it doesn't matter who you are and what you think about yourself or what others think about you, every human being is equally valuable. And of course, that only comes from the idea that there is a God who made us and stamped into our souls his image. All right, so what about the third question then? What is your identity? Or to put another way, how should you identify? How should you describe, or what should you say about yourself? Well, again, we could turn to what man says, right? Man has a number of answers to this. And the bottom line is the way that man answers this is they say, look, when it comes to your identity, you are whoever you say you are. In other words, according to man, you determine your own identity. And when you look at, I took this from a website that is a pro-transgender website. And of course, they have all these gender identities and expressions, right? The ones on the left are all the masculine, sort of like kind of gender identities. These are the neither, these are the both, these are the feminine, right? And so you could be a boy or a girl, you could be both or neither, you could be gay or straight, cisgender or transgender, non-binary, pansexual, Dutch, whatever. I mean, there's a million of them, right? And they just keep going, they keep expanding. Kind of hard to actually follow all of them. And here's what we know for sure, according to man. There are not two sexes. There are not two genders. There's not two of anything. In fact, the term binary or sexual binary is almost like a swear word in these circles. And the key principle to understand, according to this thinking, is that it doesn't matter what your body is or says, doesn't matter what science says, and it certainly doesn't matter what God says. All that matters is what you say. You determine who you are. You determine your identity. Just introspect, think about how you feel on the inside, and that will tell you your identity. And by the way, the reason why we've come to this point, and I don't know if you know of an author named Carl Trueman. He wrote a book called The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. This book is perhaps the most accurate accounting of looking at the history of how we got to this place where we're at today. And he talks about in this book how we have come to a place in our culture today where we grant 100% total authority to our inner feelings. We give our inner thoughts and our inner belief 100% authority to define who we are. And as a result, we've come to the world where no matter how you feel, that's who you are. And we grant that internal sense of self 100% authority. Now, you probably recognize that if your inner feelings tell you who you are, well, your inner feelings often change, right? They change throughout not just a year, but throughout a month, throughout a week, throughout even a day. And so if your inner feelings are what tell you who you are and your inner feelings change routinely, then you would be changing. Your identity would be changing. And they would say, and the people who would produce this chart would say, absolutely. In fact, Harvard University not long ago, they passed out a number of flyers to their student population talking about gender identity. And one of the key points they made about gender identity is that it fluctuates not only on an annual basis, but sometimes even on a daily basis. So you could be one person on Monday, and by the weekend, somebody else, in a sense. Keenan Lonsdale, an actor, up-and-coming actor, he was in the movie Love, Simon, later on in Insurgent, which became a much more popular movie. Most recently, he was in The Flash. And when interviewers asked him, hey, Keenan, would you say that you're gay? Listen to how he said, well, now it just depends on the day. Sometimes I'm bisexual, sometimes I'm gay, sometimes I feel straight, sometimes I'm not anything. It doesn't matter. Notice this is perfectly consistent with what they're saying. If your identity and who you are is based on your internal feelings and your internal feelings change, then you would change. And that's expressed in what he's saying there. See, it used to be, for all, I think of all of human civilization for the most part, it used to be that you are who you are and you have feelings that change. But today it's, as your feelings change, it changes who you are. And actually it's worse because it's not just about your attractions, because here he's talking about, the term sexual orientation and who you're attracted to. But it's not even just who you're attracted to, it's who you are. And this is what's referred to as being transgender, right? When you have an internal sense of self that is different than what your biology says. So if you're a boy that feels like a girl, then you're a girl. Or if you're a girl, but you feel like a boy, well, then you're a boy. And so it doesn't matter what your body actually is, only it matters what you feel inside. Remember what Carl Truman says, 100% authority to your inner feelings, right? I mean, this is relativism, right? You probably heard of relativism, decades ago, how, morality, it's up to you. You decide what's right and wrong, and you might differ from what somebody else thinks is right and wrong. And when it comes to religion, just pick whatever religion you like, There's no true religion. There's no true morality, right? Well, relativism has now taken the next step. It's not just about morality and religion. Now, even who you are is relative to every individual. And so throughout history, we've always considered it a problem, right? If you had a biology and a sense of self that was incongruent, we always said, well, that's a mistake. We need to realign these two, right? And the way we'd realign them two is we'd have you go to a psychologist or psychiatrist and have you change your thinking to make it match your body. But today we say, no, let's change your body to make it match your thinking. Ellen Page was a beautiful young actress in Hollywood. She became famous, at least amongst Christians, in Juno, because although it was not a Christian movie, it kind of had some pro-life vibes, so a lot of Christians kind of attached to that movie. She was also in the movie Inception, which is a huge hit, most recently in The Umbrella Academy. So again, you see here, say, oh yeah, typical beautiful young actress, but because of her buying into this new ideology, which says, however you feel inside, that's who you are, she felt she wasn't a girl anymore. And she went through and had surgery to remove her sex organs, cut her hair short, put on some boys' clothing to make it look like she's a boy, and now she says, I am now who I fully am, right? Now she wants to be called not Ellen Page, but Elliot Page. Why? Because she gave total authority to her inner feelings. And since your inner feelings and sense of self define who you are, we're going to change your body to make it match how you feel inside. Her thoughts literally changed her reality in that sense. And we'll talk more about the problems with this after lunch when we talk specifically about transgenderism. But for now, I'm just trying to bring up the idea is that when it comes to this question of how should you identify, mankind's telling us just identify with however you feel inside. That's the problem. And of course, with that new identification comes new pronouns, right? Because if you're no longer believe yourself to be like Ellen, a girl, and you believe yourself to be a boy, well now, should people refer to Ellen as he or she or what, you know? And so we have a whole culture of etiquette surrounding this idea of pronouns. Look at this Time magazine article that talked about this person who identifies as non-binary. And notice the pronouns that the Time magazine article had to use, right? It says, Time magazine spoke to genderqueer author and illustrator, I can't pronounce her name, but Maya Kobabe, on about air work, the efforts to restrict access to air writing, and what A make of the current cultural moment. Because this person's pronouns are air and A, right? So it becomes difficult. I mean, it's not just a matter of like, okay, I'm going to try to respect your pronouns. It's hard to even follow all of this stuff. And many Christians now are tempted to buy into this idea. And in fact, they call it pronoun hospitality. They believe it's appropriate to buy into this worldview of thinking where your identity is based on your internal sense of self. In fact, back in November, I was attending a conference at Andy Stanley's church, which I think is not far from here. It was a conference called the Unconditional Conference, and a lot of what was being taught at that conference was presuming a pro-gay and pro-transgender theology, and I was kind of shocked at how much of that was present at this conference. Anyways, I was attending a breakout session at one point, and it was a breakout session for parents, Christian parents, who have children who identify as transgender. And I thought to myself, okay, well, I'm sure when I go to this breakout session and listen to parents talk about their children who identify as trans, I'm sure I'm going to find some pushback to what is being taught at this conference. Like, I'm sure not every Christian parent here is going to be okay with transitioning their child. What's so surprising to me is everybody who spoke in that breakout session, and I probably heard from maybe 70% of all the parents in that room, all of them affirmed the idea that it's permissible for their child to go through a period of transitioning. And they talked about how if they didn't use their child's preferred pronouns, that this would be considered to be violence against their child. I was seriously taken aback because I thought to myself, there's got to be some people who are not on board with this. But it seemed like everybody in that room, not everybody spoke, but 75% of those parents spoke up and were all in favor of this way of identifying. So anyway, we have this whole pronoun hospitality thing being pushed on Christians to adopt this this way of thinking and identifying. And there's a lot of problems with this, as I said, but one of the problems is, again, if your identity is based on your internal feelings and your internal feelings change, then your identity changes and your pronouns are going to change all the time as well. I mean, Demi Lovato, young actress, singer, she grew up, for the most part, identifying as herself as a heterosexual person, but in 2021, she came out and said, I'm non-binary. And so now I'm changing my pronouns to they, them. But then a few years later, in fact, I think this was just last year or the year before, she came out and said, oh, actually, I changed my mind. I'm such a fluid person when it comes to my sexuality, to my gender and my sexuality and my music. I've been feeling more feminine now, so I'm going to change my pronouns back to she, her. So she went from heterosexuality to non-binary, now to feminine again. I mean, your identity is changing because it's all based on internal feelings. And it's not just a matter of, male-female, because, of course, that's the obvious thing when we think of transgenderism. But transgenderism really is anytime there's a mismatch between your internal feelings and your body. Now, that could be, yes, male, female, but it could be anything. Look at what Keenan Lonzo says about his preferred pronouns. He says, I don't want to go by he anymore. I just want to go by tree. That's his pronoun. I want people to call me tree because we're all from trees. So it doesn't matter if you're a he or a she or a they or a them. At the end of the day, everyone's a tree. And I want to call my friends tree and me tree and everyone tree. So I think like now, when people ask me what my preferred pronoun is, I'm going to say tree. He wasn't kidding. And actually, the non-binary community totally agrees. I went on the non-binary Wikipedia page just last night and pulled this up. About his entry here, look, it doesn't say he acted, it says tree acted in the popular film. His pronouns, tree, trees. I'm not mocking this. This is exactly what they are putting on us. Well, of course, our Maker says something quite different. He says, you don't decide who you are. You discover who God made you to be, right? You don't decide. You discover how God made you. And of course, we know that in Genesis 1:27, it talks about that God made us either a man or a woman, period. And we'll get to this more after lunch. Just before lunch, the next session, when we talk about what Scripture says about transgenderism. But I will argue that our Maker says, look, if you have a gender identity that differs from your biology, this is not correct. This is a sin, and you should not follow your internal sense of self. You should follow how your Maker made you to be, and I'll kind of unpack some of that in our next session. And of course, the final question then becomes, how should you live? Right? What does man say to this question? Well, I want to show you a quick video of a commercial from Diet Coke. And this commercial, to me, perfectly exemplifies how man answers the question, how should we live? Let's take a look.
Look, here's the thing about Diet Coke. It's delicious. It makes me feel good. Life is short. If you want to live in a yurt it up. If you want to run a marathon, I mean, that sounds super hard, but okay. I mean, just do you, whatever that is. And if you're in the mood for a Diet Coke, have a Diet Coke. Diet Coke, because I can.
So notice how that commercial tells us how we should make decisions. Basically, it's follow your inner feelings, right? Virtually the entire script of that commercial was filled with inner feeling talk, right? Notice, it's delicious, which is an expression of how you feel inside about this drink, right? It makes me feel good. If you want to live in a yurt, if you want to run a marathon, if you're in the mood for a Diet Coke, just do you, whatever that is. In other words, whatever you feel on the inside, live that way on the outside, right? That perfectly characterizes the way mankind, our culture, tells us we should make decisions, right? And of course, notice the only thing worth anything positive in that commercial was running a marathon, and of course, that was even poo-pooed. It's like, well, that sounds really hard, so don't do it, you know? But of course, this makes perfect sense. Think about it. If there's no maker and we're just stardust and we're just a byproduct of evolution, right? We're just an animal, then that makes perfect sense to live that way. How do animals decide what to do? What do we call that? Instinct, right? They follow their internal sense of what we should do. Well, if we're just animals, which is what people believe we are, just more highly evolved, then it makes sense that they would say, follow your instinct, follow your internal sense. Right? There's no objective standard out there. There's no like God wrote these rules or gave these outlines or gave us a manual of how to live. No, that doesn't exist outside of us. Just follow however you feel on the inside. And of course, that's the problem, is that we have all kinds of famous personalities today, artists like Cardi B and Taylor Swift will be in the Super Bowl, right? I'm sure all excited about that. Right? And these are, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to bash on them, but these people do not behave like or send messages like as if there is a maker who's told us how to live and how to be. And of course, the current generation that's growing up has all of these people's messages in their phones, conveniently placed in their pockets, easily accessible for all of us to just kind of soak in. So it's a challenge, right? Our Maker, of course, tells us something very different, right? Scripture teaches us that God made us for a purpose. I love Ephesians 2 here. It says, "For we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do." Notice, based on how we're made by God, not an exploding star, we're designed to behave a certain way, to do good works. And when it comes to sexuality, of course, the Bible's even more specific. Notice, it is God's will that you should be sanctified, that you should avoid sexual immorality, that each of you should learn to control your own body in a way that is holy and honorable, not in a passionate lust like the pagans who do not know God. Notice, people who know that that there is a God who is our Maker, we don't follow our internal instincts, our passionate lust inside. No, rather, we want to live in a way that is holy and honoring to God, right? We're commanded to be sanctified, to be set apart. So, there you have it, 4 key questions that both mankind tries to answer and, of course, our Maker tries to answer. And I hope you could see the dramatic difference between the two. I think there might be some other notes there or some other items in your handout notes, but we're going to be covering the rest of this because there's some overlap between this talk and the others. So I'm just going to end here, and then we'll dive into more of the specifics about what does the Bible say specifically about homosexuality and transgenderism in the next talk. So thanks for your time, and are you coming up to Pastor Dan to transition us, or you need me to do it? Okay, thank you so much. We'll see you guys very soon. All right.